example of when you're dealing with the location and selection of different sort of types of studies, and how various different scientific and medical claims are made, say in newspapers or within various different headlines. We come across various different statements over and over again, almost daily, that may or may not have a very sound scientific or medical claim. So there is a thing called bad science. We often come across news articles making sort of unjustified scientific or medical claims. For example, in June 2008, there was this newspaper, an agency, Sunday Express, that published an article about the link between suicides and phone masks. So what they quoted was that the spate of deaths among young people in Britain's suicide capital could be linked to radio waves from dozens of mobile phone transmitter masts near the victim's home. So there was this researcher, sort of that self-claimed researcher, Dr. Roger Coghill, who used to sit on a government advisory committee on mobile radiation. He had discovered that all 22 youngsters who have killed themselves in South Wales over the past 18 months lived far closer than average to a mast. That has been quoted in Johnston 2008. And then there was this a medical doctor, Ben Goldacre. He was the author of the weekly bad science column in The Guardian. He investigated the claim made by Sunday Express article, and he found out the following things that he said, and that I'd like to quote. He said that I contacted Dr. Coghill since his work is now a matter of great public concern, and it is sort of vital that his evidence can be properly assessed. So that researcher, he was unable to give me the data. No paper has been published, and he himself would not even describe the work as a study. There were no statistics presented on in it, and he said that I cannot see the raw figures. In fact, Dr. Coghill tells me that he has lost the figures. So, despite its potentially massive public health importance, Dr. Coghill is sadly unable to make his material sort of accessible. So, with you, we need to, what I'm trying to make out of this example is that we need to sort of see what um, scientific claims we can believe in, and what we can make out of various different scientific papers, and how well have they been established and how authentic they are in order to make such claims that can cause a public health concern. So with that being said, move to the next slide, please. Hey, stop. Okay. So there is yet another example that we see almost daily on various different brand covers and various different products, especially products of medical concern or products of cosmetics. So there have been certain claims, and this is a popular brand that claimed that we asked 149 women to try an Avion foundation for 1 week, and now 9 out of 10 would recommend it to a friend. There is no data representation to this. There is no authenticity and established authenticity to this claim. There is no there are no statistical authentic sort of tests or uh, claims that have been made in whatever locality they are trying to make these claims in. So we come across these statements daily, and they have no sound evidence-based foundations or basis. Next slide, please. So yeah, now we need to realize that in order to conduct critical appraisal or critical assessment of a scientific paper, it's all on us, and it's all on this rigorous sort of systemic practice that you delve yourself into. And with the period of time, we learn how to appraise scientific papers at math. But for beginners or for starters' sake, we need to see that there is not a single perfect tool available for critical appraisal, but there have been sort of structured approach rules have been developed, and there have been these checklists and certain guidelines have been established. So one of those would include these CASP checklist, and this is one of the most popular checklists that are used. In the next slide, I have given the URL to this website, and you can go there and you can uh, download various different checklists for various different study designs. And then you can go and make various different scorings and try to appraise a paper of a respective study design. We have a CBMH guidelines, and we have sign guidelines. Some other tools that are used are catwalk checklist. We have certain other guidelines and checklists, such as the one that has been developed by University of Glasgow, which is pretty good. If you go on to their website of the University of Glasgow, you'd see there are various different checklists, especially for RCTs and systemic reviews and meta-analyses, since their appraisal is a little different from your usual case studies or cross-sectional studies or case control studies or cohort studies. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Okay, this is the CASP checklist that I'm talking about. You can take a snapshot of this particular slide, and I've encircled the checklist portion of the website. You can go there and see for yourself various different guidelines and tools and structured checklists for doing your analysis or appraisal over a scientific field. Next slide, please. Okay, now we're moving on to the main deal. So first of all, I'd like to chunk a particular manuscript into its subheadings, headings and subheadings, and we'll dive one by one into various portions of a scientific paper and what things are essential to see or critically appraise or to sort of assess within a research-based evidence. First of all, you need to realize there is this research question needs to be clear, it needs to be understandable, it needs to be relevant, and the study itself needs to be feasible. It should add something to the literature. May that be negative or positive. That's not something that you can voluntarily control. So first of all, we have the introduction. So within the introduction portion, you need to define your objectives, and you need to correlate them with the studies that have already been done, the work that has already been done. You need to include statistics from all around the world that are the global statistics. You need to include the continental statistics, if at all, and you need to include the regional and local statistics, and that is very important. You need to quote certain studies within your introduction and correlate them with your study objectives by identifying certain loopholes or shortcomings that were left or that were identified within the previously conducted projects or studies. And you need to sort of make a connection between them. But you need to statistically sort of back your introduction up with from all around the world, and especially within your own region or locality. You can include the expert opinions. It would serve as the literature enrichment, and you need to be very cautious regarding this. You need to quote recently published articles. preferably that have been published within the last 5 years or so. And you can also include certain seminal articles. And what is a seminal article? An article that has that is an earlier article, but which has strongly influenced later developments, that has sort of stood the test of time. You need to quote the work that has already been done, identify the loopholes, and you need to make your study, your project sort of look it should look distinguished from what work has been done, and what work have various different researchers or science enthusiasts are doing, and how does your study, how do your study objectives make you stand out from the rest? Because in the end, you need to make an impact. You need to sort of establish your own rationale, and you need to make your paper let your paper make an impact. And obviously, for your own good, you need to get it published within a good or a decent journal. And why not? Who doesn't want that? So next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Okay, so now this is the most important portion that you need to critically appraise within a scientific paper. So first of all, let's see the preemptive design portion of the methodology section. The study that you're sieving through, that you're critically analyzing, might that be your own study, might that be your own project, or it can be someone else's project that you're sort of peer reviewing, or you're a journal's editor, you're going through it and you're trying to see if it really fits within your own journal. So you need to identify whether the study objectives, the research questions, the study objectives, do these things align with the study design? There should be a suitable study design that could obviously serve as the very basis to your own scientific project or article. And then we have this study population. So you need to identify what sort of population would you conduct your study on. When you identify the study population, you have this target population that you would approach. And within that, you would see a sample frame, and then you take over your own sample. And for that, you do a sample size calculation. And sample size obviously should be adequate enough. It shouldn't be too small. Rule of the thumb is the larger the sample size, the better would it be in general. And then you need to see for what sampling techniques have been used. Is it like random sampling that would obviously stand out in contrast to the non-random sampling of, say, convenience and so on and so forth? You need to identify the inclusion and exclusion criteria. And for literature purpose, you also need to realize it that what you're including, what the students do these days, and they really make this mistake when they're writing their own synopses or when they're writing their own manuscripts. What they do is they write their inclusion criteria, and within the subheading of exclusion criteria, or whilst they're writing the exclusion criteria, what they do is they write the opposite of the inclusion criteria. That's not how it goes. Or they would do something like that. If I'm doing a research on, say, intermediate pre-medical students, if I'm doing a research on them, you would not say something like this, that we would like to exclude the students who are enrolled in a pre-engineering degree or course. You cannot write that. They have never been included. They have never been the part of the research question if you include the pre-med portion of your research question within your research title. So You cannot exclude someone who has never been included. So you need to realize that. So with that being said, then we have this bias control, and there are various different methods to control bias that I'll be summarizing in the end. I saw there was a question by one of our participants regarding this. So yeah, with that being said, regarding suitable study designs that has been mentioned in this slide. So what can we make out of it regarding like suitable study designs? So we have various different research questions. For instance, if there is an area of research that is dealing with the therapy portion, for example, when if you want to assess the efficacy of a new drug or a new surgical procedure or physical or psychological intervention, what would an optimal study design be? In this case, it would be an RCT, a randomized controlled trial, obviously with a sufficient amount of blinding or double blinding. And if you are to establish a causation, if you're trying to establish a causal relationship between the variables, for instance, if you want to determine whether lifestyle or environmental factors or say behavioral factors or say genetic factors are related to the development of a particular disease, then you will go for a cohort study or a case control study, depending upon how are you gonna take the two groups, disease and undiseased portion, and disease and undiseased group, and sort of compare the risk factors. That's like another discussion. And then we have causation ke baad, we have the diagnosis, the area of research that deals with the diagnosis of various different diseases. For example, if you are assessing the validity and reliability of new diagnostic tests, so the optimal study design in this case could be a cross-sectional survey. And if you're dealing with the screening area of a research, for example, let's say you are aiming to evaluate the value of tests designed to identify like pre-symptomatic disease in populations of people, what you'd go for is an RCT or a case control study or an ecological study. So that's how you're gonna sort of chunk into the various different study designs and how those study designs are like sort of optimal for your research. With that being said, next slide, please. Okay. Also, when now we'll deal with the data dealing portion of the methodology. You need to see that there is a proper study tool that has been used, or if you're dealing with your manuscript, if you're making a synopsis or a proposal for your own research project, you need to take a proper study tool. If the study tool is a self-structured say a questionnaire or a performer, you need to test its reliability, and it needs to go through various different testings. And if it is a pre-designed questionnaire or a study tool that you're using, it should have been a pre-established tool, a pre-tested tool that sort of stands the test of time. Then you would also consider the ethical principles, if there are any. If you're dealing with an intervention, if you're trying to make an intervention if you're trying to introduce an intervention in your study, you need to see that the benefits should outweigh the risks towards the participants or towards the people or the patients that you're dealing with. So it should be ethically sound. It should be approved by the ethical committee of that particular institution or institute where the research project has been conducted. And then it cannot be stressed upon enough your data or whoever's data it is, it needs to go through suitable analytical testing. The tests that have been used in that study or that you want to use in your own study, they should be they should sort of deal with the pre-designed variables. You need to identify what tests would you use with various different variables, considering your study design and your the types of your variables. Okay, and for that, let's see another example. Okay, so there is this portion, this behind the headlines. Whenever we are trying to see a newspaper or an article, there is this headline, the center of attention that pops up on each and every paper. So what happens like sort of behind the headlines, and what various different scientific claims have been made in various different articles or headlines, and how they've been molded um, uh, to such an extent that it can cause a public concern. So there was an article, there was an article back in July 2008, I guess. It was published in the Daily Mail. So what did it claim? It was claiming that there is a link between a vegetarian diet and infertility. The article was based on a cross-sectional study. So it had a basis, but how was it molded to this bogus sort of headline? So the article was based on a cross-sectional study on soy food intake and semen quality. It was published in the medical journal Human Reproduction. The authors were Chavero et al., 2008. So there was an NHS service that provided an unbiased daily analysis of the science behind the health stories that make the news. It basically issued the following sort of comment. So it said that the Daily Mail today reports on why a vegetarian diet may leave a man less fertile. So it said research has found that eating tofu can significantly lower your sperm count. The study behind the news had some limitations. So it was small. The sample size was not enough. It was very small. And it mainly looked at overweight or obese men who had presented to a fertility clinic. They already presented to such a place with, if they're presenting to a fertility clinic, they obviously would present with these certain complaints, and they were already overweight or obese, which yet again is a confounding factor. So it focused only on soy or soya intake. So that again, yet again, is a limitation. And the Daily Mail's claim that there is a causal link between eating a vegetarian diet and reduced fertility, it was certainly misleading and it was bogus. So, and there was this question regarding bias. And in the last slide, we saw that the last point was bias control. So we need to see there are various different sort of types of biases, but bias in the location and selection of studies with respect to the methodology, it is not with respect to the example that I quoted just back now. Perhaps it is not surprising that the study on soy and infertility received some publicity. But if the study had not obtained positive results, would it have been published and quoted in the news because it made into the headlines? So when reviewing the literature published in scientific or say medical journals, we should consider that papers with significant positive results are more likely to be submitted and accepted for publication, which is like publication bias. They are published in a major journal written in English, which is Tower of Babel bias. They are published in a journal indexed in a literature database, especially in less developed countries or developing countries, which is a database bias. It could be cited by other authors. It can be considered as a citation bias, and it is published repeatedly. It can be considered as a multiple publication bias. So whenever we're going through these claims or scientific medical claims that have made their way into the headlines, that these could be the reasons to that. Okay, so moving on to the next slide. Okay, so now we have the results. portion of the scientific paper or the manuscript. We need to see that the results have summarized the demographics. The results have summarized the mean and median values related to the demographic variables. The results include both the significant and insignificant statistical tests. And it is very, very important. Sometimes we think that if the results of our study, if they don't come out to be significant, there is no point in doing that research, or there is no point in publishing that research. So an insignificant statistical result would also add to the literature in treasury. It would also serve as a literature enrichment. So because things could go like both ways, things could go one way, not both ways. So it could either be sort of there could be a relationship between two variables, or each variable or one variable would not be influenced by the other variable, and that's totally okay. So do not be hesitant, and do not be ashamed, and don't go towards data fabrication, data forgery for the sake of obtaining significant results. And then within the results section, you need to have visually appealing standard representation of data results. If you're making plain tables, and if you're doing these basic theoretical results, you're writing these theoretical results summaries, that's not going to be appealing. And that's not something that readers would like to read. When you're trying to publish your article in a journal, and you send that article for publication in a journal, they would like to see something that's a little appealing, something that stands out a little, so that they can have more readers attracted towards your article, and in return towards their own journal. Next slide. Okay. So this is the discussion portion, which is sort of similar to the introduction portion of your manuscript. So within the discussion portion, you need to, first of all, summarize your own findings, your own results. And then you need to compare and contrast. You make comparisons with various different studies all over the world, and especially within your own region. You do a little compare and contrast. And if the differences between your results and the previous results would arise, you need to give a possible justification for that. And that justification might be some sort of gender variations, socioeconomic variations, or the genetic variations, and so on. Then you need to quote the global and local studies. You need to critically justify the deviations as mentioned. There should be an acknowledgement of limitations. You need to, if you're writing your own manuscript, or if you're writing your own paper, you need to enlist your limitations, the limitations of your study. And you need to acknowledge them. So in order to sort of broaden the horizons of future studies, and sort of broaden the scope of future studies in that case. And then you have to identify the conflict of interest, if any. And if there is a conflict of interest, then obviously the reviewers who are sort of reviewing your article for publication in a journal, they would like to consider that, especially financial or pharmaceutical conflicts of interest. Next slide, please. Okay. So the conclusion portion, it's sort of a summary of your whole research project. You need to consider the validity of results. Have the results properly been summarized, or there has been a proper interpretation of the results that has made its way within the conclusion portion as a theoretical element. You need to consider the relevance of the results, and you summarize your findings, and you sort of you sort of make a claim that you have achieved the rationale of the study and how would this make an impact. So the conclusion portion um, comes in the end, and then we have the next slide, references. Okay. So then we have references. So we have various different journals that would require you to reference um, your uh, article or your study in various different referencing styles. The standard that we use in most of the journals here is the Vancouver style. You need to obviously see the journal guidelines for that purpose and use a proper referencing style. You need to make sure that whatever you've referenced within your article, it is taken off from recently published work. You also need to make sure that your work is not plagiarized. It's not um, you have not sort of copy pasted um, someone else's statements or work, or you need to sort of give credit to that, credit to those people, those researchers, those authors. And not only that, but also you need to reference them in such a way that your work is not plagiarized, because you're not going anywhere with that. So with that being said, that's pretty much it from my side, I guess. Next slide, yes. Thank you so much, guys.
Assalamualaikum, Ms. Shafi. Do you want me to say out the questions or?
Yeah, you can, or maybe you can send. Uh, are there any questions within like sort of there's a chat box for that? I can
Yes,
read
chat
them.
box maybe hai, and then there's questions in the Google form as well.
Okay. Okay. Star, you can start with the questions in the Google.
Okay, the first question was that can you explain bias control a little more?
Okay. So once you're dealing with bias, is especially bias control would be an important factor in trials, in clinical trials, in say RCTs, randomized control trials. You need to control bias in such a way that the study or the data collection would not be influenced by um, the the doctor who is conducting or the researcher who's conducting the study, not by let's take an example. So if you're conducting an RCT and you are conducting an RCT, the statement of which would say something like effect of honey solution on post-operative nausea and vomiting in patients undergoing laparoscopic cholecystectomy. So so you'll have groups, and those groups would be a control group and an experimental group. So when you have these two groups, you would be giving, say, a placebo drink to, say, a watery and aqueous solution, or some sort of a juice, or the honey solution to the experimental group. And for the control group, you would like to give just water or something plain. So when you have introduced this intervention and you're trying to see its results, the person who would be giving out those solutions to the patients should be blinded. Say if the nurse is asked, or the staff nurse is asked to give that solution to those patients, she should be blinded. She shouldn't know which solution is which. And then again, your doctor should also be blinded, who is conducting those operations and who is observing the patients after the operation for the effect of the control solution or the experimental solution. The doctor should also be blinded. So this is known as double blinding. So you can control your bias by doing certain sort of double blinding in case of an RCT. And if we are talking about certain cross-sectional studies in which we have various different variables, we can control bias by controlling our confounders or confounding variables. The confounding variables could alter the results of your study. For instance, if we want to see the effect of if you want to see the effect of say obesity, if you want to see the relationship between obesity and the development of hypertension or cardiovascular diseases, the confounding variables could be um, an increased age, or it could be a gender variation, or it could be some sort of a comorbid disease that could eventually cause alteration in the results. That comorbid disease can, in return, contribute to the development of that cardiovascular disease or hypertension resultantly. But in the we would not be sure about that. So you need to sort of eliminate that confounding variable. You need to eliminate those confounders in order to obtain a sound result.
Okay. So the next question is that does using old data references affect in any way with the publication process or anything that hinders?
Can you repeat the question, please?
Does using old data references affect in any way with the
Yeah,
publication process?
yeah. Old.
You have old references.
Okay, old. Yeah, yeah, that does. It's sort of an unwritten rule. If you're trying to publish an article, it's preferred to include the references or the studies that have been not conducted, that have been published in the last 5 years, within the last 5 years. That's sort of an unwritten rule. And if you want to publish your article in a decent journal, you need to sort of include recently published articles, and you can include the seminal articles, as I mentioned in my presentation, that have stood the test of time. There are articles or there are references that sort of define a particular procedure or a particular term, and that has stood the test of time, and that's totally okay to quote them. But apart from that, recently published work is preferred.
There's another question. Can we reference a meta-analysis in a letter to the editor?
Yeah, you could do that.
A question I wanted to ask was, okay, what's an efficient way to cross-check the references in an article? For example, if I get an article to review, what's a quick and easy way to check all the references?
You can use your referencing softwares. You can use EndNote, you can use Zotero, you can use Mendeley for that. And apart from that, what I do when I'm reviewing, especially while I was reviewing various different articles while I was the student editor of our university journal. So what I used to do was run them through the software, and after that, I would manually check them as well, because sometimes there are some things that I think are missed by your softwares. I used to manually check them. You have the referencing styles, the sequence to which you are going to write your own referencing style, or your reference for that particular style. Whilst you know that, you can sort of manually see them and then sort of run them through a software or vice versa. That's totally okay.
Okay, so another question is, does closed access and open access journals are different in value? Like, is an open access more worthy?
No, that's not. No, I think I cannot make such a claim. No, I wanted
Uh,
to, but I cannot.
is this related? Someone has asked that, can you do a critical appraisal of a study from its abstract?
No, you cannot do that. You can sort of you can get an overview. You can see if it's like worth reading, if it's like worth quoting. And honestly, when people are dealing, especially undergrad students are dealing with their researches, they do give a very sort of a bird's eye view to the abstract, and sometimes not even the abstract. They just copy the reference from a pre-existing article and just quote that. But I think in order to get a bird's eye view, you'd see, especially with practice, when you have sort of done a lot of literature review, when you've sieved through a lot of articles, you'd get in practice and you'd know which article stands out where. And if that article is published in a good journal or in an impact factor journal, you'd definitely consider the fact in like you'd have this at the back of your mind that this would be a decent enough article to sort of pursue reading.
Mm. There's another question. What are the main areas of focus for critical appraisal? Like what part should you focus most on?
The main area that you need to focus on would definitely be the methodology section. And for that, you need to have a very good grip on the study designs and the sampling technique to a decent extent, and obviously to the statistical test that you're going to, the analysis portion. They need to have a very good grip on that, or a sound grip on over these sort of topics, in order to see do does the research question or the research hypothesis, it sort of does it align with the study design of one's manuscript? Does it do that? Often it doesn't do that. Often you'd find certain comparison studies or prevalence studies being merged into various different study designs that they don't even belong to. And I apologize for saying this, but they would be published in certain black journals or poor journals, or there would be articles of poorly written articles in general. Yes.
Hmm. Okay, so if there's a study on risk factors, then what is the ideal study type that the researchers should have used?
Okay. If you're trying to identify the risk factors to the development of, say, a disease, if you're trying to identify that, you consider, acha, isme na, we have two basic scenarios. Number one would be if you have the patients who have already developed that particular disease that you're working on, and you try to trace them back in time and ask them, with obviously backed up by evidence, you'd ask them about their exposure to certain risk factors. And once you do that, if you're dealing with the patients and you're sort of tracing them back in time to see if they have been exposed to risk factors. And then the other approach would be if you have a person who has a particular sort of risk factors, or who has a particular risk factor, or who has been exposed to a particular risk factor. That person is not diseased right now. You can follow that patient up for years, and then you'd see if those patients in that particular group develop that particular disease or not. So you sort of compare the exposed and the unexposed patients against the people who have developed the disease and the people who do not develop the disease. So basically, you will go with cohort and case control studies.
Okay, so there's a question. If results of research analysis come out not significant, does it affect the quality of research?
No, it does not. I did mention this in the probably in the results section of my
Mm.
presentation, that if your results are not significant, that even that would serve as um, a literature enrichment that would be published, and it would not make a difference at all. Say if you're trying to establish a relationship between functional um, functional capacity and nutritional status of old people or elderly patients. If you're trying to establish that, and if your p-value comes out to be insignificant, then your establishment would be that there is no relationship between nutritional status and functional capacity of the old people or the elderly. So, and that's totally okay. You're trying to, you have given a statement and you have deduced a result from your study, from your data, and that's totally fine. If there is no relationship, if you're claiming that there is no relationship, there might be an expectation to there might be an expectation um, to the fact or to the opinion that there must be a relationship between these two variables, and if there isn't, you can sort of justify it by the limitations of your study, or simply because it's that way, it wouldn't affect the quality of your research work. So that's totally fine. That's not in your hands. But what you could do is minimize bias. You could include a good, decent sample size. You could do a good study, write your manuscript honestly, and that's just totally fine. I had studies that did not give out significant results, and that have they have been published in good journals. So that's it's totally fine.
Okay. There's a question, it's being repeated, slightly irrelevant, but they're asking that when referencing some facts that are mentioned in the introduction of of an other manuscript with references, do we need to use that reference or just the article which has mentioned them? मतलब for example
Okay.
किसी में, do you understand the
This one.
question? ठीक
Yeah,
है.
yeah. So you need to reference the parent article from which the statement has been picked. You do not need to reference the article from which you read that statement. That has already been referenced towards a parent article. You need to trace that back. The parent article which is making that claim, which is concluding or which is making those, which is doing those deductions. And you need to um, uh, reference that particular parent article, that particular say case zero article.
Okay. There's another question that what type of English language is best for manuscript? And another
Huh?
person also asked, like, how do you write in how do you write scientifically?
Okay. How do we write scientifically? So, okay, while you're writing your own manuscript now, most of the lines, 99% of the lines in your introduction and in and about say 70% of the lines in your discussion portion of the manuscript, they would be referenced. They would be making some scientific claims based upon um, the deductions that have been done by previous researchers. So mm, for that, you'd not have to make a lot of effort. The only thing that you have to keep in mind regarding that is you need to avoid plagiarism. And in order to do that, what you're going to do is, while an easy way would be when you're picking some claims or some scientific statements from a parent article and you're trying to reference that and you're trying to put that, you're trying to quote that in your own manuscript, whilst you're doing that, um, you need to sort of paraphrase it, you need to change the words a little bit, and you need to um, rephrase it, you need to write it in your own way, but the claim should be the same. It shouldn't generalize opinions, or it shouldn't generalize the deductions. It should make the same claim, but in various different, in different terms or in different wording. And regarding the methodology portion, that would be simple. You would simply be writing the lines regarding the preemptive study design and the analysis. The results portion could maybe tingle you a little bit, especially when you're trying to represent the data. Whilst you're trying to represent the data, what you basically do is you make you sort of create data figure or representation of a data figure. You make your tables and you make your charts and you make your graphs and stuff. So once you do that, you give their headings and you give their captions and headings and stuff. And then you sort of elaborate those figures and those findings within within each paragraph. So you deal with those facts and figures and that data results one by one, and you sort of try to um, incorporate that within the results portion. But the first draft that you would make of your manuscript wouldn't be nice. It would be all it would be full of jargons. It would be full of it would be haphazard to some extent, and it wouldn't be nice. And that is why critical appraisal is important. You go through your manuscript over and over again. You make a draft and you sort of redraft it, and then you redraft it to an extent when you cannot point out big or huge shortcomings within that manuscript. So it's not like a one-time job, but with time and you'll improve. With practice and time, um, you'll definitely improve.
And can we use those guidelines to make our own research, like the critical appraisal guidelines?
Yeah, and they're so I'd share them up in your WhatsApp group as well. They are pretty good. The checklists and the guidelines, they're good, and you sort of get sort of when you're experienced enough, especially while dealing with surveys and case control studies and cohort studies and all these descriptive studies, while you're dealing with them, and you're like you have gained that particular amount of experience, so while you're dealing with those researches, you sort of don't need a checklist or a guideline, or uh, you don't need those tits and bits of these little chunks and sentences that have I done this and have I done that and have I done. You get into that routine. But if you're a beginner or if you're at an intermediate level, I think it would be it would be better to consult that those guidelines and those checklists in order to get yourself into practice, not only in order to review someone else's article, but also in order to sort of formulate and birth your own manuscript for art.
There's a question that what's the most common error you see in manuscripts?
The most common error that I see in manuscripts would be, um, I think, the literature portion, the introductory portion. It's usually it's not well written. It is to some extent the articles that I used to come across as an editor. So those would include plagiarism and linguistic errors or overgeneralization of statements picked up or cherry picked from the apparent articles, and lack of referencing and lack of sort of recently published work. The methodology section would usually be it would be it would be decent enough. It has matlab, gone through various different supervisory boards and gone through various different guides of their own. The authors, whoever their supervisors are. So that portion is not like really bad, but the introduction portion is um, massively flawed. And so is the discussion portion because that also involves uh, quoting down the literature.
Okay, so last two questions. One of it is that does critical appraisal help you to write a letter to the editor?
Yeah, it does. It does.
Okay, and the last question was a lot of people were asking what is the importance of doing a critical appraisal?
Okay. So why do we need to critically appraise or analyze or assess a paper? So what will we make out of it? Number one scenario would be you're a journal editor, or you serve as a peer reviewer, or you serve as a general reviewer to an article or a journal, or say any piece of evidence in general. So what you'd be doing is finding out if it's suitable enough for your journal. So that comes off as a peer reviewer or a journal editor. So that's like a high post. But apart from that, what as students or med students or undergrad students would you like to make out of critical appraisal is um, identifying loopholes within or shortcomings or within the previously done work or the previously done researches or studies, identifying that and taking sort of a lesson from those loopholes or shortcomings. Might that be shortcomings that have come forth or that have been birthed because of a particular study design or because of a lesser sample size. You take lesson from that and you try to improve your own manuscripts and your own studies and projects regarding um, the publication process. So what you do is that you critically analyze those papers and improve your own projects, your own proposals, your own manuscripts. And apart from that, you could, and in return, what are you trying to sort of, what do you aim for? What you're trying to aim for is that you are trying to get your article or manuscript published in a decent journal. If it isn't published in a decent journal, if it is published in, say, a black or a predatory journal, it wouldn't matter. So you would have wasted a lot of time on basically nothing. Next, Fatma.
Yes, thank you so much आपने इतनी patience से questions का reply करने के लिए. It was a really good session. मतलब with critical appraisal, we can now like see other people's researches if they're good, and even like check our own researches before publishing, before submitting them for publication. Abhi Arisha is gonna do the ending notes. And Arisha, can you hear me?
Thank you, Fatma.
Yes.
Welcome.
Is there any activity you wanted to conduct, or it's just uh, we end this? You mentioned
आवाज
about some.
Yeah, अब तो time इतना नहीं है ना, तो I prefer sending a PDF over in your groups, and the participants, if they're willing, if they're interested, they can critically appraise that article, and they can send their the appraised version of the article in that group only if they're comfortable, and if they're not, they can directly DM me the Word doc or the PDF that they have appraised.
That thank you, Dr. Amisha, for such an amazing session. Your insights on the topic would surely guide the young and enthusiastic researchers that are seeking guidance in the field. We thank you on behalf of Journal Club for your very precious time. Thank you so much. Allah Hafiz. We are
Thank
now
you so
going
much.
to
Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for joining. That'll be the end of this session. Thank you so much, Amisha. Abhi.